Good afternoon, everyone. Today, I, Lakshay Jain, fifth year BLLB student of Royal Law College, will host the 17th podcast of the Arcane conquering title Decoding Investment Treaty Arbitration, a guide for ADR enthusiasts. Today's speaker is Miss Vaibhavi Rane, ma'am. Now, I would like to introduce Me-Arcone to you all. Me-Arcone Queening is a part of Wiki Arbitration and Conciliation Council, which has started its podcast series to spread awareness on ADR under the guidance of Dr. Deepika Sainin, ma'am. So, ma'am, can you explain the fundamental workings of investment treaty of arbitration and provide an overview of what it entails?
Good question, Laksha. So, in order to understand investment treaty arbitration, first we have to understand what that concept is, right? So, in simple words, it is a dispute settlement mechanism, where one party is a sovereign state and the other is a private individual or an entity who is the investor. And this mechanism primarily presupposes that there is an existence of a bilateral or a multilateral treaty, which is signed not with the investor, but between two or more sovereign nations. Now, historically, this concept stems from something called as the mixed claims tribunals, okay, which existed in the 20th century. Now, what is mixed claim tribunals? It is basically where the two parties who bring the claim, so one party who brings the claim, both of them are not sovereign states. That is what we see in international law. In ICJ, when a dispute is taken to the ICJ, it is between two sovereign states. However, in the 20th century, with the rise of globalization, or the first signs of globalization, you can say, disputes arose between a foreign investor, that is a citizen of, and the host country or the host state, that is the place where the investment was brought in. When disputes arose, the question was who would adjudicate this dispute, because there was a bias which was seen in the host state, and there would be probable bias in the home state as well. And that is when mixed claim tribunals were initiated. And this started in the earlier 20th century, primarily in the Latin American countries. And from there, we see the concept of investment treaty arbitration gaining a lot of traction and being codified and being used in the international scenario. Now, when you ask me about the fundamental principles on which investment treaty arbitration works today, it is certain principles such as protection of the investor who injects the capital or financial resources in the host state. So he is, or they, sorry, they are treated fairly and equitable. They are given national treatment. There is no unjust discrimination against them. In case of expropriation, it is justified and with compensation. So these are some of the basic fundamentals on which investment treaty arbitration works. So to summarize, basically what we can say is this kind of arbitration, investment treaty arbitration, is a specific kind of arbitration wherein a clause of arbitration is contained in the treaty and the foreign investors are not a party to this treaty. That is something we must understand at the onset. Because in international commercial arbitration, there is an arbitration clause in a contract between two individuals or two enterprises, right? So in this, there is no foreign investor party to the treaty. Rather, when a state, a sovereign state, enters such a treaty or such a bilateral agreement or a bilateral treaty, the state offers or opens itself to arbitrate. That is, in case in future there is any dispute, the state says that you as a foreign investor can come and file a claim against me via arbitration. And the foreign investor later on accepts this claim by making a request for arbitration when and where required. So that is what I believe are the fundamental principles and how investment treaty arbitration takes place. The procedure of it is very much like arbitration, commercial arbitration. So the process remains the same, but the main point of difference or the fundamental difference is in the existence of a treaty.
Okay. Absolutely, I agree with you what you said. Now, I will next question. Forward to next question. How do investment treaty arbitrations balance the interest of states and investors, particularly regarding state sovereignty and the protection of public interests?
Okay. So traditionally, when we look at investment treaty arbitration, and as the history that I stated, the process is majorly for the protection of the investor. That is the people who come and inject the capital within that within the host state. Now, with keeping that in mind, investment treaty arbitration has been considered to be in favor of these investors, and that is why certain rights, which were mentioned earlier, national treatment, expropriation clause, all of it, that is what has been protected. However, when you speak about protection of the sovereign state, which is also a relevant point, especially when the investor is not an individual, but rather big enterprises and MNCs whose economic capacity and economic strength is much more in certain cases than the GDP of a developing country or a least developed country. And that is when the concept of wanting to protect the interest of the sovereign state and the people within that territory comes into picture. See, what I believe is we must realize nations, when they open their doors to investment, foreign investment, for injection of the capital, that is primarily to for their economic development. But no sovereign state in ideal situation lives itself vulnerable to claims, possible claims from a foreign country, let alone individual entities or MNCs. So there are certain procedural safeguards, for example, exhaustion of local remedies before resorting to arbitration, something which is seen in the Model BIT of India of 2016. So countries increasingly are using such kind of procedural safeguards in order to protect their interest. Secondly, there is this new concept coming up that is transparency and public participation. So if a new investor is setting up any industry within a territory, it has to be made public, and the locals must be made aware of what is happening, what kind of industry it is, how is it going to affect them. That is increasingly becoming popular. Now, secondly, even when you're speaking about the concept of investment, as arbitration students, you must have heard about the Salini test and the Salini case. Where, yes, so wherein it was determined what would be the parameters for a arbitration. For in an arbitration, what would be considered investment. Now, what I realize is in a BIT, the concept of investment is on purpose left vague, so that in case of challenge, it can be contended whether that claim which has been brought out, whether it is investment or not. And that to a certain extent, I believe, is some kind of protection which a state gets, that a sovereign state gets. Even increasingly now, there are these BITs which specifically mention what kinds of rights of the sovereign state have to be protected, speaking from the perspective of public policy making for the benefit of the citizens. For example, your the Canada European Union Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, it regulates the right of a sovereign state to protect public health, safety, and environment without the fear that they would be violating the rights or their obligations towards foreign investors. So what it essentially does here, it carves out certain exceptions that yes, as a sovereign state, you are supposed to observe and maintain certain rights and obligations of the investor. But at the same time, as a sovereign nation, you have certain responsibilities towards your citizens. That is to protect their health, certain basic fundamentals which we find in public administration and public policy. So those are stated explicitly within the new BITs and MITs. Even in certain cases, such as the Philip Morris and the Uruguay case, it was recognized by the tribunal that as a sovereign state, you have a right to protect your citizens and your ecology or your environment, and you cannot give it up. Everything cannot be given up to the investor. So I believe in that way, the sovereignty of a country as well as public health or the interest of the public is protected by BITs and MITs now. And of course, it is the sovereign states which look after its own interest and its citizens. So that is what I believe is happening currently. Earlier times, you could say that yes, that states are giving up their sovereignty to a certain extent to attract investors. But now the trend is changing a bit, and we can see that sovereign states are protecting their own interests.
I agree with you what you said, ma'am. What are some of the major challenges currently facing investment treaty arbitration, and how are they being addressed by their international community?
Okay. So to give a brief background, a couple of years back, I wrote a paper on this. What are the major challenges in the investment treaty arbitration or the investor state dispute settlement mechanism in general, that is ICSID and everything. So, so after that, when I checked, before today, I was checking upon what are the trends, what are the challenges. I was just going through it. And surprisingly, most of the challenges continue to remain the same even after 2 years. Okay, so if I have to broadly classify, then it is the lack of transparency. Arbitration itself is a mechanism wherein there is no trend to publicize, because see, it's a transaction between a private entity who has trade secrets and who has other the documents, classified documents, and a state once again who has the same parameters. So the publicity or even within the public, the information getting out or sharing the information is a bit not is unheard of. So historically, as well as in current times, lack of transparency and, for that matter, public accountability is less. Although the trend is coming up, and there is also the uncitral transparency rules of 2013. It speaks about there need to be more transparency in treaty-based investor-state arbitration. But that remains one of the key critics of the system. Secondly, we also see the inconsistency in arbitral awards. Now, arbitration, when we speak about BITs, via BITs and MITs, they themselves within the BIT mention or give the freedom to decide where the tribunal will be or which will be the tribunal, and where the what the law would be. Right. So basically, it depends case to case. There is no centralized authority. If we compare it to the World Trade Organization, where there is an appellate mechanism and the dispute settlement mechanism, if there is a judgment, sorry, if there is an award and it has to be appealed, you can go, or earlier before 2021, certainly in case of trade disputes, you could go to the appellate body. But it is not so in case of investment treaty arbitrations, because each tribunal will give their own opinion on a certain matter, sometimes even on the same kind of matters or a similar kind of matter. So the award differs from tribunal to tribunal, and there is an inconsistency for certain principles. For example, one tribunal might interpret national treatment principle for a same kind of good or same kind of business in one case, but the another tribunal might consider the same case in another manner. So there is an inconsistency in arbitral awards, which can be minimized maybe by having some kind of regulatory rules, or some kind of appellate mechanism will maybe. But looking at the World Trade Organization, we have to create this appellate mechanism in such a way that nobody can paralyze it, or it continues to function in a systematic manner. So that is one way forward. Another increasing challenge which is faced by the mechanism is of lack of diversity of arbitrators and some kind of bias. Okay, so as I said, once again, going back, investment treaty arbitration is for the benefit of the investors. And these investors are not private individuals like you and me, but somebody who have global presence and who have a lot of capital to influence the decision of a country even. So it is forum shopping, and all of this does take place, and there is a tendency amongst arbitrators that yes, this entity, this investor might choose me for another dispute at a later point of time. So there is some kind of bias which exists, because there is no existing pool of arbitrators from where they can be chosen, but it can be anyone which the party wishes, right, based on what kind of bench is mentioned. So there is a perceived bias and lack of diversity amongst the arbitrator. And the last point, which relates to your second question, which you asked me, is there is still, although it is being reduced, there is still some kind of balance of power disparity between the investor and the state. There is a concept called as regulatory chill, which means that a national government, mostly the developing countries and the least developing countries, in order to attract investment, what they are doing is they are keeping public policies or public some law for public good, which might be against the MNC at on hold or against the investor on hold, in the fear that the investor might back away. So what we are seeing here is an is a sovereign state can or is willing to give up its sovereignty or give up its public good in order to attract investment. So that is also another challenge which the mechanism faces. However, that is being remedied as we saw just now. The new BITs and the regional approaches that we are seeing are trying to remedy this and make these sovereign states, especially the least developing countries and the developing countries, give them a parallel field or a level playing field with MNCs who are investors. So I think that briefly, I would say, I would think those are the major challenges which this mechanism faces currently.
So, when my fourth question is, what are the emerging trends and future developments in investment treaty arbitration, and how might this shape the landscape of international investment law in the coming few years?
So when we speak about emerging trends, that would be all that we have seen up till now, especially focusing on what I just answered previously. The emerging trends that we can see once again is trying to remedy the balance of power. Okay, so there are these regional approaches that are coming forward, such as the African Continental Free Trade Area, the Asian Comprehensive Investment Agreement, which now are developing their own mechanisms to investment disputes. They are reflecting more upon their regional priorities more than a national priority, right? So what is happening now is it would be a collective decision of the region rather than only one entity or one sovereign state. For example, instead of Vietnam, it would be the Asian which would come together. This is a new word. Even there are certain BITs such as the Moroccan Nigeria Bilateral Investment Treaty, which contains this balance of protection for the investors and the sovereign states. And it specifically mentions that in case of environmental issues and health, the state is free to take any decision and it would not be in contravention or in violation of the rights of the investors. So that is relating to what I just answered. That is an increasing trend which is coming up. Even for that matter, there is this Pacific Agreement on Closer Economic Relation Phase Plus, which emphasizes and specifically looks at the small island developing countries, small island nations, which are not just facing economic issues, but also are quite vulnerable to the climate change issues that are going on, sea level rise and their erosion. So this agreement specifically looks at small island developing countries, which once again is quite a way forward. So these countries now have a bargaining power. So tomorrow, if a conglomerate like Tesla wants to go there, an investor, and it wants to set up, rather than they just saying, okay, agreeing with the investor that, okay, fine, do whatever you want to do on my small island that is remaining so that my people are benefited. Now they can have a bargaining power. Okay, if you don't agree to set up with us, the Pacific Agreement, the members of the Pacific Agreement on Closer Economic Relations, none of them are going to have you as an investor as well. So agree to our terms. So I wouldn't say it is they will get a major bargaining power now, but there would be a level playing field at this point. That is what I believe. Now, lastly, I think technology is something which is playing as an important aspect everywhere in all the fields, and similarly in investment treaty arbitration. So, in the during the COVID, we saw online case management by the ICSID. So they were using certain platforms such as Case Lines and Opus 2. So those can be used in regular proceedings as well, and that would also help to reduce the cost and reduce the time which is taken in a settlement of these disputes. So I think these are some of the trends that we can see when we speak about investment treaty arbitration around the world.
It was a lovely podcast, ma'am. We would like to thank you, Ravi Rani, ma'am, for contributing in our initiative and accepting our invitation today. Vabani Rane ma'am, through this podcast has created a great discussion and has given wonderful insights on the investment treaty ATR. I hope that will all learn something new about and ADR today and that a percentage of our mission to spread awareness about ADR is achieved today. Thank you, ma'am, for coming.
Thank you, Lakshay, for this kind words and Bhavya Jyoti for coordination. Please convey my regards to your man. It was lovely being here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.